Bitcoin is this tool, but it's just a tool. On a Bitcoin standard, life's still difficult. After what happened in 2020 and 2021, people around the world lost their mind, and there's a benefit to living around a group of people in high density that have good heads on their shoulders, value freedom, and then respect other people's freedom. And that wasn't true of many places around the world. And Texas wasn't perfect, but it was a lot more normal here and preserve rights that I would never give that up. In order for money to solve a problem, it needs to be widely adopted, widely accepted, and the most important property of money is that at the foundational level, someone else can't make more of it arbitrarily. Yep. And that Bitcoin really perfects that, and all of the Bitcoin that have ever been issued have not been issued arbitrarily, but based on actual energy expenditure. And there's an amount of Bitcoin that's out there circulating, and the greatest evidence that it's working is the fact that, well, it does store its purchasing power. And then as you start to see that feedback loop of it storing purchasing power, it reinforces that nobody else is printing it.
So there's been a heated debate recently how Bitcoin Core handles the op return data.
It doesn't feel like there's actually been an honest debate.
Hello and welcome to another episode of You're the Voice. I have just stolen someone's set. I wonder if you recognize where I am. And no, I'm not replacing Marty yet. But I have been, in Hebrew we have a word called chutzpah. It's chutzpah? Like audacious.
Yes,
Like you have chutzpah.
Okay.
So, I had a bit of chutzpah, and yesterday I asked Parker Lewis whether I can interview him spontaneously in this set, and he said, let's do it.
Yeah, well, we host the Bitcoin Takeover here during South by Southwest, so, just appropriate that we take over Marty's TFTC studio to record this quickly, or, kind of ad hoc basis.
In the spirit of taking over.
Yeah.
I've taken over as well. So thank you so much, Parker Lewis, for joining me.
Fun to do this. It was great to meet you last year in Prague about this time of year. And
that's right.
It was fun to have you walk into the Commons, now Bitcoin Park Austin, yesterday and pop in. So
I'm on a journey.
That's one of the benefits of having physical places. You can pop in and then we can record podcasts like this.
And this place, for people who don't know, Austin Park, Bitcoin Park in Austin is just magical. It's so cool. There's a pleblab here with all the startups. There's a workstation area. There's the area where you do your events. You hang out here every day, right?
Yeah, and we host events right out here. We can tear this down from co-working and host 250 people here for big events. And so...
And Unchained on the other side.
Yeah, Unchained's down the hall.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right at the center of Austin.
And this is the heart of it. I mean, I came here for a few days, but I said to my beautiful hosts, who are Bitcoiners as well, like, it's not a perfect trip here if I don't see Bitcoin Park. So they brought me here, and here we are.
Well, glad you stopped by.
Yeah. So I'm going to start with a quick intro, just for my audience that may not know you. I don't know why that would be, but Parker Lewis is the author of Gradually Then Suddenly, head of business development at Zaprite, and a respected voice in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Formerly head of business development at Unchained Capital, he's known for making complex ideas accessible and for articulating Bitcoin's role in restoring long-term thinking, personal responsibility, and economic sovereignty. Deeply rooted in Texas, Parker is a vocal advocate for the state's role in defending freedom and anchoring Bitcoin adoption. So let's start with Texas, right? I saw one of your recent tweets saying Texas will have the most seeds per capita and the greatest hash rate per capita. And people will claim that freedom is simply a coincidence of natural resources. I love that. Can you unpack that a bit and explain why Texas, in your opinion, is uniquely poised for a leadership role in American liberty?
Sure. And part of that tweet was the ongoing debate that Jack Dorsey kicked off about seeds versus a seedless approach to self-custody. And I think what BitKey's building, it's a great tool, but they take a seedless approach. And having worked at Unchained, and then also just how I secure my own Bitcoin, think that holding seeds is really important, and it does require more responsibility and accountability. But that tweet was an offhand way to say that, you know, there's a culture of freedom in Texas, and that my view in terms of custody around Bitcoin, and the greatest way that you can achieve security is to truly be sovereign over your Bitcoin. It's the greatest control you could possibly have, and to do it over a finitely scarce form of money is particularly important. And people from Texas just generally will go that extra length to control their own destiny and ensure their own sovereignty. And so basically it was a statement on both the custody side as well as on the Bitcoin mining side that that the culture of Texas is perfectly fit for doing both of those things, self-custodying and mining. And that, you know, oftentimes people will look around the world and they will, you know, there's a book called, you know, calling America the accidental superpower because of all of its resources, which really glosses over what actually allows for the development of resources. And that, you know, one way I think about it is that for, you know, really only the last 200 to 300 years, people have been filtering into Texas for freedom. And that for people that might live in Europe or the Middle East, you know, 200 years is a very, you know, short period of time. But that, you know, you can look to other places around the world that have large amounts of natural resources, of which Texas is one of them, and well known for it. And a big part of the Texas economy is built around energy and energy development. But energy alone and natural resources do not dictate freedom. It's more of an output of a culture, and then people and
human
those people creating a governance structure that promotes it. And so Bitcoin has a great home in Texas, but it's not just because there's a lot of natural gas under the ground and oil under the ground. It's because the people who've been here for hundreds of years have come here for the reason that they could have a level of freedom in Texas that they maybe didn't have before. And then the output of that is a place that's perfectly suited to attract both Bitcoiners, Bitcoin development, and Bitcoin mining.
And what brought you to Texas, or were you born here?
I was born here. I was born here. I have not always lived here. Born and raised here in Austin, and then went to school in North Carolina, and then lived in New York for a period, and then back to Texas. Mm-hmm. So did a tour outside, but always knew that I would come back.
You're the Voice is brought to you by Trezor, the original Bitcoin hardware wallet company pioneering the development of self-custody for crypto assets since 2013, empowering individuals with an open source device, enabling beginners and experts to easily and securely hold their coins. I find my Trezor super easy to use and recommend it to my friends and family. Enjoy my 5% discount on Trezor products by clicking the link in the show notes and using the code FLAT.
Are you coming to BTC Prague? The biggest, most influential Bitcoin-only event in Europe returns on June 19 to 21, with 200 plus speakers on 4 stages, 100 Bitcoin companies presenting at the expo, and 10,000 like-minded Bitcoiners and freedom lovers from all around the world. There's a great emphasis this year on the freedom movement, so if you're a freedom maxi like me, you don't want to miss this event. I'm excited to attend once again as a speaker and to interview the best and brightest for my podcast. In fact, BTC Prague is where I conducted my epic interview with Michael Saylor. The event runs for 3 days with a Developers Day, pitching contest, panels, presentations, and parties. Ticket prices increase on the 1st of each month, so make sure to get your ticket now. Use my code FLAT for a 10% discount, and see you in Prague. Is it because you really appreciate what you just said, the level of freedom that this state
provides,
you know,
it's difficult to put your finger on, but I'll just say whenever I leave, and then whenever I come back.
Yeah.
You know, and there's also just an energy to Austin.
Yeah.
You know, it's
a very cool place.
I'm lucky to come from a great place. But then it's also not coincidental that it's a great place and it attracts great people. And so, yeah, I wouldn't, you know, I couldn't imagine living anywhere else, you know, and I don't try to explain that by being too, you know, I don't know. It's just Texas is a great place, and when you're from here, and you know, I've been to other places and lived in other places, but especially after what happened in 2020 and 2021, you know, like people around the world lost their mind, and there's a benefit to living around a group of people in high density that have good heads on their shoulders, value freedom, and then respect other people's freedom. And that wasn't true of many places around the world. And Texas wasn't perfect, but it was it was a lot more normal here, and preserve rights that maybe were foregone. And I would never give that up. So if I could look all over the world, I wouldn't find a better place to be.
I think my hosts told me that just across the street here in the university, for example, during COVID, they were quite sensible, and they wouldn't go ahead with all the mandates, the weird mandate, or at least some of them, being a little bit more sane than
it was far more sane. Now, the university that's just across the way, it was only created a year ago, but maybe they were explaining the University of Texas, which is down the road. But yeah, so, and I mean, there's the saying that freedom lost is rarely regained, and yeah, it's just it's a significant tail risk. And again, I'm here because I'm from here, but it's also a great place to be, and that when you know, a little bit of Texas history, Texas really was, and maybe there was some other place, but if it was not the last frontier, like the truly one of the last few unsettled places in the world, and it was that reason or was that way for a reason, that since the early 1800s, people first came to America and were in the Northeast, and then they were in Appalachia, and then those people, many of them came to Texas. And so, and Texas was an independent country for a period of time. That's part of our history. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it's just a lot of compounding reasons that, Texas attracts a certain type of person, and it's not for everybody though. You know, like it definitely filters people out too.
Mm. Beautiful. Well, you did answer me a bit of that, but what values or lived experiences here shaped your view on liberty and resilience? You may want to share a story or something.
Yeah, it's hard to
pinpoint
It's hard to pinpoint. Yeah. One of the things that I think I read in a Texas history book is that, and people that aren't from the United States or Texas, they may get a sense of this, but I can understand how people are annoyed by people from Texas because they always talk about Texas. And it's difficult to put your finger on of why, what's so special about the place. But, one of the interesting things about Texas and people from Texas, without speaking too pejoratively, is that there's American history, but then there's Texas history. And in schools, they teach Texas history, and there's this weird thing that's hard to put your finger on, we associate our history with Texas history first. And I'm not saying that is how everyone does, but I saw this described in a book, after, this was 5 years ago I saw this. So it's like, I've grown up. I didn't learn this as a kid. And I was like, oh, that's actually an accurate description. Like all the things that happened in the American Revolution are somehow growing up just inherently secondary to Texas's. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is because of the fact that Texas was an independent country for a period of time before, it fought its own revolution. It won its own independence, and then it joined the United States after that. And then there's the story of the Alamo, which is part of the story of how Texas won its independence. And I think that part of history is that there was a fort in San Antonio where the Alamo was, and there were a group of settlers there that were 300 to 400 in total, and were under siege from the Mexican army fighting, Texas against Texas was in its fight for independence. And there's this really famous letter by William Barrett Travis, and Austin is in Travis County, named after William Barrett Travis, where he writes a letter asking Sam Houston to, it's a broader letter to basically request reinforcements, but sends it to Sam Houston, where he basically says that he's under attack and they're besieged by thousands of troops, and that if reinforcements don't come, that he'll fight to the death and victory or death. And everyone at the Alamo, save a few people that were allowed to live, everyone died. And that's where the saying, remember the Alamo, comes from. It wasn't this great victory. It became a rallying cry for freedom. And another piece of the story is that despite the fact that the Alamo fell, Sam Houston, who was the general of the Army, later became president of Texas. He was formerly a general in the U.S. Army and a senator from Tennessee. That he knew that if he had gone to the Alamo to send reinforcements, that they would have lost the war, and instead didn't send reinforcements, fought another day, and then ultimately won Texas's independence, and that is core to Texas's history. So I think having those stories of and at the time, William Travis there fighting at the Alamo was 27 years old. And that also instills you in a sense of, even myself, I suffer from this of thinking hey, are we big enough for this task? And then when you think about the history and people had to give their actual lives and fought for a revolution for their own freedom and independence, that instills something in people. And that if those people fought for their freedom and they were here for a reason and they laid the foundation for this, that there was a reason, why of all places they came here. So I think that it's difficult to pinpoint, but that history,
that spirit and that history is very inspirational. And I'm sure, for thinking people, it makes you wonder, why am I not good enough or mature enough to start my own battle for freedom or engage in one, just because of my age, or all these limitations that we have, that we think we are not. Yeah,
I'm only X. What am I?
Yeah, who am I?
Right.
Why would I do it? But yeah, if you do take interest in your history or in other people that actually took responsibility for things and fought for them, you start your journey to find your own spark and power and sovereignty.
And it's interesting because when I say that Texas was one of, if not the last frontier, in late 1700s, early 1800s, there were on the order of magnitude of tens of thousands of people, and that there's a reference to the Six Flags over Texas, which I think it was the French, the Spanish, Mexico, Texas as an independent country, the United States and then the Confederacy when the Confederacy fought, but that prior to Texas winning its independence, it was under the control of a combination of France, Spain, and then Mexico after Mexico won its independence from Spain, but that this particular place was almost unsettlable, and that it required a certain type of people to come seek it out and settle it, which I think also is interesting. That people were kind of coming up from Spanish Mexico and west from the United States, but this part of the country specifically. Mm-hmm. And then these people come, they fight for their freedom, they settle it, and then now we, like if you see the population of growth of Texas over time going from, tens of thousands 200 years ago to 35 million, 40 million, it's like it wasn't the natural resources. The natural resources were always there. Mm-hmm. But that's also just an interesting phenomenon.
Wonderful. All right. Let's talk a bit about your gradually then suddenly thesis. Does it still hold up today? And if so, where are we on the curve in 2025?
Yeah, I'd say that most everything I struggle to look at, or there's nothing fundamental that I look back on that I feel like is on a principles basis any different than
it is today.
Than it is today. Yeah. We're definitely still in the gradual phase. And for people that don't have the context, the book is called Gradually and Suddenly. I started writing an online series under the same title in 2019. Yep.
Bring it on.
This is the copy of the book. I had the artwork commissioned by a Bitcoiner that I've actually never met in person and paid in Bitcoin, but yeah, have not. Proof of paint.
Proof of paint.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful painting.
Yeah. But Gradually and Suddenly it's a common adaptation of a part of a Hemingway book called The Sun Also Rises, where one character asks the other, "How did you go bankrupt?" And the other character responded something along the lines of 2 ways, gradually and then suddenly. And so that was the way that Hemingway, via the characters in Sun Also Rises, described the process of going bankrupt, of like, you're bankrupt at a point in time, but it was a series of
events,
decisions that gradually led up to that point. And that the way I relate it to Bitcoin is that it's also the ways that countries become bankrupt, and how people come to understand Bitcoin. And it's really the other side of the same coin, because when one of the ways to, I'd say, visually be able to see that a country is bankrupt is via hyperinflation. Mm-hmm. And that happens gradually and then suddenly. That there's a moment in time where the confidence in the currency is lost, but it wasn't at that moment in time. That it happened over a long period of time leading up, all of the money printing and debasement and the economic balance that ensued, and that Bitcoin is the solution to that. And the way that people typically come to understand Bitcoin is consuming some, like in most cases, consuming some general primary piece of knowledge or education, listening to a podcast, reading a book, reading an article, going to a conference, and
hearing from an annoying friend.
Yeah, hearing from an annoying friend. And looking for something, but it not making sense, and Bitcoin is inherently hard to see and get your head around. But then something typically clicks that unlocks it in your mind to be able to see what maybe you couldn't see before. And everything's not intuitive at that moment, but then it becomes inevitable once your mind opens up. Absolutely. And kind of pair that primary education or knowledge with some lived real world experience that allows you to then really go down the rabbit hole. So my book is kind of helping hopefully accelerate people down that path.
For me, it was clamping down on my freedom during COVID. That was painful and woke me up to it. It's like, I got to find a solution for my money, because they're going to next come for my money, or they're going to come for my private property, just like they did for my bodily autonomy. So
and had you had some knowledge of Bitcoin prior to that? I
have heard about it several times before, but I always ignored it. And I actually also thought it's a FUD, because I was working in tech for 20 years and I've seen all the ICOs along the way of the shit coins. And I'm like, this is gimmick. It's bullshit. And I did hear the word Bitcoin, but I associated it with crypto and ICOs. Yeah. I didn't learn until COVID came, and it was painful enough to go, okay, start hitting me with solutions. Like, I need other ways of preserving my freedom on any level, on every vector of my life. And so I asked some of my employees that I knew that they held Bitcoin if they can teach me. Can you tell me what it is? And they couldn't for the life of them. They sucked at it. They were like, go to Kraken or go to whatever exchange and buy some. And I'm like, but what is it? Can you teach me a little bit? They did not know to direct me to resources and whatever, until this number one Bitcoiner in Israel found me, because I was in the streets. I was an activist at that time of COVID, and I was like demonstrating against the government and all that. And he saw my work and he's like, she gets the government corruption and the scammery on all levels. How come she doesn't get Bitcoin or doesn't get money? And so he came to me at that time. It's like, you need to understand Bitcoin. I'm like, thank you. Hallelujah. Yeah. Teach me. And I was so primed for it. So you're absolutely right. It needs to, there were a series of events in my life that kind of showed me how people, entities, the government, the state can clamp down on my human rights and freedom. And at one point there was this trigger of like, okay, it's enough. I really feel it now. I need to take action. So you seek for it at that moment. And and I think that most people are just living in La La Land and not seeing it. And I'm not judging, I was there too, but.
Yeah, I think that most people look at Bitcoin as a solution in search of a problem, and that one of the things I try to do in the book is explain the problem that everyone suffers, to then be able to understand Bitcoin in relation to it. Mm-hmm. But a big part of that is pairing what I would refer to as primary education or primary knowledge with something happening in the real world. Like, if, when Canadian truckers got their bank accounts shut down, and then people who donated got their bank accounts shut down with no due process. Yep. If you didn't know what Bitcoin was or had no context to how it related to that problem, Bitcoin, if it happens, is irrelevant to you. But if you've either heard something about it, then that actual real world experience is education, because you can relate it to someone and say, I need to understand this more, because those people were saying that this is this exact thing that this is designed to protect against. Or what you just described, something happens and you say, I have a problem. Mm-hmm. I just had my money frozen in my bank account, or I saw those people that had their money and their bank accounts frozen. I did. That's a problem. I need to go now seek out a solution. Right. That it happens one of those two directions.
Tired of feeling like your freedom and future are fading away? Do you live in a country with growing inflation, crazy housing prices, weird culture, and a chaotic economy? You're not alone, and my friend Mikkel Thorpe and his team at Expat Money can help. Mikkel is the world's leading expat consultant on a mission to free you from broken systems. He's been an expat for 25 years, lived in 9 different countries, and has helped hundreds of people with second residencies and passports, offshore banking, international investing, and many other essential tools. If you're serious about protecting your wealth and your family, it's not enough to hope things will get better. You need a plan B in another country. The team at Expat Money can help you build it legally, safely, and without wasting years of research. Visit expatmoney.com/eflat and leave your details for a follow-up. In a world hypnotized and sleepwalking towards totalitarian control and digital enforcement, awakened voices rise to inspire change and radiate hope. In December 2024, I had the honor of hosting Professor Matthias Desmet at a conference I produced called New Totalitarian Order. This masterclass is now recorded and available to watch. The conference explores the psychology behind global mass processes, offering a behind-the-scenes look at science, economics, and human potential. It addresses challenging global agendas, mass formation, transhumanism, consciousness, societal change, and the path to transformation. Click the link in the show notes to access 3.5 hours of exclusive presentations, in-depth content, and my fireside chat with Professor Desmet. Use my code EFRAT for 10% off. I hope you find great value in it.
Absolutely. And I encourage, this is most of my audience, by the way. I mean, today I already have a lot of Bitcoiners in my audience, but when I just started with the podcast, it was mostly people that had woken up during COVID. I call them red-pilled. You know, they have seen a lot of the scammery around big pharma and big tech and the government clamping down on their rights, but they haven't seen everything to do with fiat and with Bitcoin. And so I've been taking them through that journey from red pill to orange pill to try and educate them on what does this solve and what are they not even aware of. And in fact, this is a really interesting point, and maybe you can talk into that as well, because most of that audience, like if I group my audience in groups for a second, has the, you know, they do want freedom. They're very much oriented towards human rights, liberty, and freedom wherever they are in the world. But then they get stuck in the solutions part with, okay, cash will help us preserve our freedom because cash is like a little bit outside of the government. And they don't take the time, and it gives us privacy. They don't take the time to actually learn what cash is, what fiat is, and how they are being debased and how their money is worth less and less. And most of my audience are in Western countries, so they may not feel it as much in their pocket as they do in a hyperinflated country, for example. And so I try to bring that education, and I think that is one of the key areas that I need to focus on, showing them that cash is never a long-term solution because the state and government control it and they can do whatever they want. But, you know, maybe you can add something onto that, because people are in most Western countries are simply not aware of what fiat, how limited fiat is and how risky it is.
Yeah, well, whether it's physical fiat or digital fiat, that there are, it's like if you have physical fiat and they're printing more physical fiat, then your physical, you're escaping one problem, but you can't escape the root cause of the problem, because you're using that money as effectively storing your time and energy and the value you've delivered in the past to be able to survive into the future by trading with other people. And you can't escape their printing press.
That's right.
You might be able to escape the digital system, but the digital system is just an extension of the physical world. And so... and
that's the other thing these people are afraid of, anything digital, because it means surveillance for them. So I'm trying to break it down. Not all digital is the same. Not all digital is bad. We will talk about the shortcomings of Bitcoin as well.
Right. And I think that...
nothing is perfect. But
what I see people struggling with the most is the if I'm in this digital world and I have this savings and it has this idea of this 21 million fixed supply, that's great. But if I can't do anything with it,
mm-hmm.
if it can't actually get me the things that I need to be able to sustain myself and survive, then is it really the tool that you say that it is? And that what I try to connect for people is the causal relationship of what the input is versus the output, and that painting some vision of the future such that it's, hey, we're not all here to just stare at our digital wealth and say, hey, the computer on the screen says I have X number. It's that because because Bitcoin is immune from government control at the protocol level, or control of anybody at the protocol level, then that is the basis of why it is resistant to censorship. It's the basis of why its fixed supply is actually credibly enforced without the need for trust. And that so long as that most basic foundation holds, then everyone will demand Bitcoin for that reason, and will evolve from this system where people are using Bitcoin principally to save and not actively use, to a world where you're going to use it like cash.
Yeah.
And you're going to use it in a way that doesn't necessitate you having to go back into the banking system to interact with the real economy. And privacy is a concern, but it's also one of those things where technology advances incrementally and marginally. And so if you understand the foundation of what is driving everything, and one of the ways that I would describe it is, I talk about it in one of the chapters of my book, where it's that if you can get your head around this idea that there's a form of money in the world that can't be printed and that everyone can opt into, and that's actually truly permissionless and resistant to censorship, and even if the U.S. government wanted to try to prevent Bitcoin from proliferating in the world, it couldn't. Mm-hmm. Shouldn't take other people's word for that, but if you go down the rabbit hole and figure out how it actually all fits together and how the network works, then you come away from that being able to see the cause and effect. Like, okay, if I would do this, if I would save some of my money in this, and I can relate to the next person and they would do it for the exact same reason that I would, well, as all of us start doing this, then we become able to directly trade with each other, and we get those benefits. But that it doesn't go from zero to fully functioning overnight, and that the true 0 to 1 innovation is there's this form of money that can't be printed. And then 1 to N, or 1 to globalization, is, okay, how do we take this foundation and make it a utility? Mm-hmm. Part of that is making it able to actually be used in commerce, but another part of it is like, okay, how do we improve privacy, and accepting that it's not perfect. Mm-hmm. But there's no sense in having a physical piece of cash. If I've got, $1 and the Fed can create $5 trillion, then it's like, what good is my privacy if I can't
use what I've got,
pay anything,
use
it, because it's lost all of its value.
That's right.
That what we ultimately have to have is both. But money also doesn't grow on trees, and we have to start with the foundation of, here's this emerging good that does have a credibly enforced fixed supply. It only does because no one's in control of it, and now we have to develop tools to make it a utility and to protect our privacy at the same time.
Absolutely. So now you're touching on then the classic debate of store of value versus medium of exchange. And I think we're at a period at the moment where we're seeing a very significant push to just treat Bitcoin as a store of value in the West. I'm not talking about other countries around the world that really have economical need to just hold on to anything that is more stable than their fiat currency. But if we look at the Western countries, and specifically the US with the institutional not takeover, but we talked about takeover, but how they are embracing Bitcoin, there definitely is a push to just look at it as store of value at the moment. And then people who want to jump in, but they're like, okay, it's not money yet. It's not a medium of exchange yet. It's only a store of value. And there's this narrative of digital gold and a commodity and an asset. Given that it takes time, as you said, to jump from 0 to 1, then from 1 to N or scaling it globally. And we're only 15, 16 years into the evolvement of this invention. How long do you think we are down the path to start seeing Western adoption of medium of exchange of Bitcoin?
I think that there's no shortcuts, and that everything will emerge just as Bitcoin has emerged organically. That once you understand why Bitcoin stores value, once you understand that it stores value because it has this fixed supply, that doesn't matter how many cryptocurrencies in the world exist, you really only need one form of money, and that in order for money to solve a problem, it needs to be widely adopted, widely accepted. And the most important property of money is that at the foundational level, someone else can't make more of it arbitrarily.
Yep.
And that Bitcoin really perfects that in making it finitely scarce. People can't make more of it at all after a certain point. And all of the Bitcoin that have ever been issued have not been issued arbitrarily, but based on actual energy expenditure and ordered work. That once you've figured that out, and not just that somebody else says it to be true, but you start to understand why it can't be undermined, and that you're not taking someone else's opinion of it, but you understand it at a root level, then it becomes hyper logical to just say, well, why don't you pay me in Bitcoin?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's
and
right.
Because it's technically able to. And there are some points of friction that are some just how the transaction actually occurs, some of it being the tax consequences, but you could either take fiat, incur the cost of the fiat system, and then convert it to Bitcoin, or if you have a customer that will pay you in Bitcoin, it becomes the most logical, efficient thing to do. And so I view it as this logical order of, well, first you have to understand why Bitcoin will store value. Then once you do and get far enough along that path, you say, well, if you're willing, still accept fiat currency, but I'd prefer to be paid in Bitcoin, and I'll create an incentive for you to do it, or create a incentive for you not to pay me in fiat. But that it is a function of adoption, that the more people that understand the first part, which is why it's a store of value, that it's tied to its fixed supply, and that it is credible, as adoption grows, there's just more opportunities for trade. Mm-hmm. And then I think a big part, I would say, probably 99% of people probably come to understand Bitcoin because they've read some book or podcast or had some friend explain it to them. At the end, more than 90% and probably 99% of people will come to understand it because it's being used as money. That those first set of people that went first turn around, and then, we're working on Bitcoin payments at Zaprite, but when someone like Square turns on Bitcoin payments, and then our grocery store down the road that uses Square, mm-hmm. every person that comes through there sees that they have the ability to pay in Bitcoin. That is actually education.
Absolutely.
And that what a lot of people get hung up about Bitcoin with is, all this sounds good in theory, maybe too good to be true, but you're telling me it's the best form of money that's ever existed, and I can't buy food at the grocery store, gas at the gas station. How is that money? Mm-hmm. And I can tell people that, well, hey, everyone, for the same reason that I've adopted it, for the reason of its fixed supply, and that's if the same exact reason why I would do it dictates why the next person and the next person and the next person, that's all intellectual, economic. It's not theoretical because people are actually doing it. Mm-hmm. People are actually saving in Bitcoin. So it's actually in practice, but it hits different, and it actually is different when, I actually have this Bitcoin that I'm saving in, and I go to my local grocer and buy food. Okay. Harder to deny that it's money. I can actually see that, explanation of why that will logically happen occurring. And as it occurs more, then everybody gets that.
Wants to join, and
get
get the
it's not even join. It's just, it makes it discernibly easier to understand because they're seeing it used in the way that that they expect out of money to go buy things.
Yeah.
So, and it's an interesting thing that people will say that, people in the developing world have the most to gain from Bitcoin because 5 out of 8 billion people, 5 out of every 8 billion, there's 8 billion people in the world. 5 to 6 billion of those people do not even have a bad form of good money. The dollar, euro, yen, yuan, pound, maybe put a few more there, but they're all debasing and everyone is suffering that same problem, but they're at least working. Mm-hmm. But the people in the developed world that have access to these working but depreciating currencies that are causing massive economic imbalance and ultimately will all fail, because if you print money, that is the end game and you can't prevent it. That people who have the greatest amount of wealth have the most to lose. So on one side is like the developing world has the most to gain, but the developed world, like you have to have some value to store in Bitcoin. Uh-huh. And that high agency people who are the people that I would say are most attracted to Bitcoin of saying like, I've got a problem, and rather than just accept it and go along saying, no, I'm actually going to take a step to even if seems like a Herculean task of how do we actually get out of this? If you see the problem and you didn't pair it with the solution, it would be very easy to be pessimistic. But if you see Bitcoin as a solution, then you say, okay, yeah, this sucks that there's all this economic imbalance and instability that occurs because they print money and not great, and Bitcoin doesn't solve all the problems in the world, but I'm going to take this forward positive step to solve the problem that I see. That even if someone could look at the US and say, well, why would they take Bitcoin payments here? It's because people have that mentality of like, they've picked up, like everyone that's here in America and then filtered into Texas has left some other place in the last couple hundred years, left everything they've known, and they didn't wait till the last shoe dropped to do that. And I think it's the same mentality where it's like, okay, who would wait if you wait to the point that you absolutely have to have something, it won't be there when you need it. And that's the mentality of people. And again, it's very early to Bitcoin payments, but I also expect it to shift rapidly, beyond a critical mass, because it's downstream of people understanding Bitcoin. And as Bitcoin goes on for more time, credibly enforces its fixed supply longer, more people own it, more opportunities for trade exist, there's more high agency people Bitcoin becomes tangibly easier to understand, and the tools are there. And then as they see people using it as money day to day, it just all feeds on itself. And so I don't, it might be illogical to think that someplace like America that has the dollar would be one of the last places to accept Bitcoin as payment. I don't see the incentives that way, and that it's more logically the people that are highest agency that will say, well, I'm not going to wait till I really need it, because that's not the way I deal with any risk in my life. So
especially with money, that people with high agency that do Bitcoin understand that being an early adopter pays off. So why wouldn't they continue that same trajectory of, okay, I've tried this thing out, it's working, maybe I should try more things down that path because it has worked for me so far. Just the fact that I've decided to buy Bitcoin the first time, it probably was a smart move. So maybe I should continue learning, continue educating myself, continue seeing what else I can do with this thing. And
for sure. And I what I will tell people is if you don't yet understand why Bitcoin will store value, and I don't mean like have a inkling in your eye of why it might, it's continue to go down the rabbit hole, continue to read books, educate yourself, form the primary knowledge. But if somebody is fully in and sees the field and gets it and knows two things. With certainty, they're going to print money, and that Bitcoin can't be controlled and it has this fixed supply. For them, it's logical. It's not like I'm going to do something that I'm taking a risk on. I'm just doing something early, but I know I'm going to have this, the ability to accept it if I'm a business, and it's the most logical thing to do.
Absolutely. I've just been to 2 farmers markets here in Austin the past few days, and I've paid in Bitcoin. And the merchants, even those that didn't accept it before we onboarded them, they were like, yeah, happy to, why not? Let's try. A few of them, at least 4 of them. I made videos and stuff, but they're open to it.
Yeah.
People,
I mean, everyone knows there's a problem, and then helping connect Bitcoin to that is, not always the easiest thing, but once you do, in a big way of helping to create that bridge, is like, oh, and I can actually pay you in it right now for your goods and services. And you can't do that with other things. And when people actually see it in practice, it is part of the education. And the more that it happens, the more it's going to bring the rest of everybody else along. Absolutely.
I've been to El Salvador for about 5 or 6 weeks, and been to Berlin, for example, in El Salvador. Circular economy of it's a small village, small town, 140 merchants accept Bitcoin. And they're poor, very poor, most of the population there. And it's just so beautiful to see what kind of change it does in the local community. Not just the people's spirits, but they certainly have hope now. I interviewed many of them, the merchants. Some of them, God bless them, no teeth, very poor, just selling something small, memorabilia or souvenirs. And I ask all of them, why do you accept Bitcoin? And they all say the same thing, because it taught us, and it continues to teach us how to save. And we can save more money once we start accepting it. And then we get it, and then we store it, and then it teaches us to save. We never saved until today. Many of them told me the same thing. It's just so beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, people have been, especially in the United States, people have been conditioned that their money doesn't hold value. So then it creates a disincentive to save. Yeah. And then as people start to save in Bitcoin, and even if they've heard that it can't be printed, that there's an amount of Bitcoin that's out there circulating, and the greatest evidence that it's working is the fact that, well, it does store its purchasing power. And then as you start to see that feedback loop of it storing purchasing power, it reinforces that, hey, actually in practice, nobody else is printing it. And this is actually reinforcing a positive decision that I make. Now I want to keep doing this, and I want to keep delivering more value to save more. So it's a very, it's not saving for the purpose of, again, looking at your wealth on a screen. It's because it's actually empowering you to deliver more value. And if everyone's acting with that same incentive, I can deliver more value to you and then preserve that value and trade it with other people.
Yep.
Very, very positive feedback loop.
Very positive feedback loop. Okay, the next question is a little bit more advanced for those who don't have Bitcoin, but those in Bitcoin will get a lot of value out of your answer, I'm sure. So there's been a heated debate recently how Bitcoin Core handles the op return data, a part of Bitcoin used to store arbitrary information like inscriptions or metadata. While it sounds technical, the real issue goes deeper: how changes to Bitcoin are made and who influences them. You recently said op return is a distraction and warned about the risks of centralized core and centralized mining pools. Can you walk us through what you meant, especially for beginners? I want people to really understand what we are fighting, quote unquote, fighting about in the Bitcoin community. And
yeah.
Why do you think this is a bigger concern than the inscription debate itself? And what precedent are you worried that we're setting?
Yeah, so I'll maybe explain it for Bitcoin or for beginners, and then explain it at a more technical level. But the way that I conceptualize the way that Bitcoin is secured, which is a very intricate puzzle, but if there's three main constituencies, it's people that hold the private keys to Bitcoin, that ultimately, if there's 21 million at the end of the day or 19.8 million today, the people that actually control the economic value of the network. And then there's people that, there's nodes, people running computers that run the Bitcoin protocol that are at the foundational level, how Bitcoin's actually transmitted between people and Bitcoin wallets, and how Bitcoin is validated. And if I'm sending you a Bitcoin transaction, part of validation is, was this Bitcoin created in a manner consistent with the fixed supply of 21 million? And then there's mining. And so they're kind of like, you know, there's more than just three, but the three main constituents. To notice that I didn't say developers. Yeah. People that run nodes, the people that hold private keys, because someone like Unchained could run a node, but people can hold their own keys. So there's circumstances where those functions are separate from each other. And then the Bitcoin mining ecosystem, which I think about as the function that is clearing for final settlement currency transactions. So on a decentralized basis, effectively operating, not, I wouldn't say like, but in the U.S., the system, the Federal Reserve or the
commercial banking,
the banking system is saying, okay, this is or isn't a dollar. That when I send a Bitcoin transaction, in order for it to be confirmed, a Bitcoin miner actually has to validate it and write it to history, and that requires a massive amount of energy expenditure, and that work makes it difficult to undo. That it anchors it actually in the real world. So if there's miners, people that run nodes, and people that hold the private keys, there's this important constituency, which is developers, core developers, which write and change the software for the people that run nodes. And that the reason why Bitcoin is secure is because it's entirely decentralized. Doesn't matter if people that work on Bitcoin core change Bitcoin or versions of software, because there's no automatic updates. People all have to opt in, and they can verify what version of the code that they're running, and if they don't like any changes, they don't have to. So it's not, even though there's a relatively few number of people that actually work on the underlying protocol, it's not a risk in the sense of they can't make you run other software, and that people can ultimately choose, and that there's kind of these competing and balancing interests. Well, mining is particularly centralized, and Bitcoin Core is particularly centralized, and that this change being proposed and that has been merged but not yet released, in my view, is a marginal issue, relatively insignificant if only looked at in what it is, and recognizing that it's not a consensus rule. There's certain consensus rules like the 21 million fixed supply and how many Bitcoin are issued in each block that add up to that 21 million, and how they're issued, and so the problem that I see for more technical people is that in my view, this change wouldn't have occurred or wouldn't even been discussed if not for the fact that mining was centralized, and that consciously or subconsciously, the core developers wanted it because they I believe genuinely think it's the best technical solution. But if there were 100 mining pools or 1,000 mining pools, part of what their calculus was for this being the right technical solution is that they know that there's so few miners, and the miners will upgrade because they can look around and say, well, there are those three, and will they run this new code? And that what it creates is a precedent is that, and it's been very clear from the core developer's perspective that if there's consensus amongst them, then regardless of what users of core think, that if there's, and again, maybe it's difficult for them to all get consensus amongst the active contributors, but saying if we all agree, then we should push a change. And that is realistically enabled from the fact that mining is centralized. That if mining was centralized and there wasn't now this precedent set, then the centralization of mining wouldn't be a big deal, and the centralization of core wouldn't be a big deal. But what it effectively does is, if this isn't in my view, a highly consequential change, but the precedent sense is, well, if we want to change a consensus piece of the code, which does define what is and isn't a valid Bitcoin transaction, and in a more meaningful way can change the foundational layer, that now that the precedent has been set, and that if we all agree, again, if there were 1,000 different mining pools, it wouldn't be nearly as problematic because that would be a check and balance. But in a world where mining is centralized,
and the core,
it's not practical as it exists today for people to have an alternative. The primary alternative is to just simply not upgrade, but the lack of a second core compatible, and what I'm talking about is core compatible, not forking, nothing, but core compatible that actually presents a second option, would create a scenario where there's more of a check on people making future updates to Bitcoin, and that the calculus isn't, and this is also I think part of the precedent, it's this view of we're going to do it anyway because you don't really have any other options. And that if you start to really understand risk, that it becomes untenable to anybody that looks at the scenario and say, well, they're kind of right. Right now, there isn't, people are running a second implementation, but Core's criticism of it is that they say there's really only one contributor, but there's not there's not this wide, nearly as exhaustive group of contributors that contributed to the project. But it's like, that's a really bad mentality to have, where it's like all these other people are running your software and your users, and you're looking at them saying, well, if there's consensus among us that we're going to do it, but then realizing that, well, the only reason why they're able to have that mentality is for a combination of the fact that mining is centralized, and consciously or subconsciously they're exploiting that centralization, with the fact that there's not, in their view, or most people that are using Bitcoin today's view, of to say, well, if you're going to make that change, then I either have to opt into that change if I want to have any other future changes that I do want. Therefore, the most logical thing, and it's not easy to do, but is to have a second viable implementation that is compatible with Core, because if you're looking at it, it basically it's not, again, it's not, there's nothing critical happening to Bitcoin.
Minute in terms of the feature itself.
Yeah, but the broader significance of it, that a real,
the governance, it's more
there's a precedent being set, and it's one of, if users disagree,
right,
but we all agree, the people that are active contributors, and to
Tomorrow
go forward, even if it's contentious. And of
Yeah.
course, it would be logical to do for the first time with a fairly insignificant thing. And anyone would say, well, it would be different if it was something like a consensus soft fork, like Opcat. But as a user, you're in the same dilemma.
Absolutely.
And that if you wait until it is more significant, then it's like the same idea of, you don't wait to the point of no return to operationalize something to de-risk it. And if there's a critical risk, and who knows how it plays out, but my expectation is it will play out with, even though it hasn't existed in the past, that I think it would benefit everybody, benefit Core, benefit all Bitcoiners if there was a second implementation that was compatible with Core, that was a check and balance, so that there were competing ideas, competing processes, and other viable solutions, such that that people have an alternative to change to, other than just not upgrading a version of software.
And at the moment, the Core team is against creating another competitive.
I wouldn't necessarily say they're against it, but
you're not even thinking about it.
I would say that they're more like, they're taking this posture of daring people. They're making a decision knowing that people don't really have a viable alternative,
right.
And again, I'm not ascribing it to any individual, but that it's with this mentality of like, we don't, all you people that disagree that that we shouldn't do this, like, what are you going to do about it? Mm-hmm. Like that is the mentality of many people, without pinning it
right.
to anyone. And even if people aren't expressly saying it, it's guiding this decision.
Yeah. And
that there's another side of it, which is like it doesn't feel like there's actually been an honest debate. Mm-hmm. That is like, what is the role of arbitrary data in Bitcoin, and what is someone who runs a node who's using Bitcoin as money, what is their incentive for relaying, even they're going to validate a transaction because it's valid based on consensus rules, a transaction that's just arbitrary data. And that debate, may have been happened 10 years ago, before virtually anybody had been in Bitcoin, but this has been the standard. No one was asking for this. It doesn't really fix any problem. Kind of came out of nowhere, and then when there was disagreement, the precedent that was set,
feels like a pilot for something.
Yeah.
I said it.
Yeah, you said it. And so I just think with how important Bitcoin is, that everyone would benefit of, and I don't know how it because the people who say that it would be really difficult to have a second implementation, they're right. But then if there's a serious risk, it's just like, it's the same thing of saying, well, Foundry represents 25% of hash rate. Antpool, depending on how you look at it, has more than 50%. You throw in Marathon, you're like, well, how could we ever conceive of a world that mining isn't centralized? It's like, well, because Bitcoin's too important and there are high agency people. And even if most people wouldn't go out and solve a problem to help decentralize mining, or figure out how to de-risk Bitcoin by having, I don't expect there would be tens of options, because capable people have to be able to devote their time and energy to something. But the fact that there's only one, and that the people making decisions on how to change that are making it knowing and at least partially being guided with this idea that there's a captive audience, but then not maybe having, I don't want to say temperament, but not appreciating the sensitivity of that, and realizing that there are people that are saying, oh, like, we're not going to sell our Bitcoin, we're not going to, but we do question the judgment on this, and we see the risk, and the risk isn't opportune, the risk is the next change, that either we're not high agency to create a solution, but then that just kind of feeds on itself. It reinforces that either you were right and that's a problem, or you were wrong and hopefully we end up in a better place. So that is deep for Bitcoiners, but what I would come back to it is saying, like, hey, there's people that run nodes, there's people that have private keys, and there's mining. Right now, there's two parts of that are fairly centralized, and it's okay because there's enough check and balance. But another way to think about this is, at the beginning there was Satoshi, and then Hal Finney joined the network, and there were two. And now there are millions. Like, Bitcoin's constantly decentralizing. There's periods of time where it goes from a more decentralized state to a less decentralized state. And I think that's what's happened in mining, but that there's still every incentive in place to force decentralization at every level. And that the more that happens for all constituents on any side of the debate would be better. The only scenario where it wouldn't be is if the network fractured, but that doesn't seem like it's the mentality or interest of anybody that's even debating this. Is not saying, oh, we should go fork Bitcoin, even though that is kind of being suggested by the people who are putting forward this change, which is kind of gaslighting. But
I saw David Bailey tweeting, fork it.
Right, which is like, no one's been suggesting that. So why are you gaslighting everybody? But that people would benefit by having an alternative if it, on the quality and capability side, it was at the same level of review, maintenance, contributions. So we'll see how that plays out, but feels like there's every incentive. There's 19.8 million Bitcoin that have an incentive of ensuring the credibility of Bitcoin's fixed supply and having a good competing interests that provide checks and balances on other key parts of the ecosystem.
And I love the fact that you're with the hand on the pulse, you and many others, to really voice the problematic nature of what's happening right now. And it's very important that you make the distinction between the actual feature that is being suggested to the underlying more the deeper problem that can come out of it. And it's forward looking, which is really important, because if we are in a system that is based on principles of freedom and decentralization, then we want to uphold enough checks and balances to make sure that it continues to be that way in the future. And even when we recognize, you and many other good people recognize a small risk or potential risk in the future that is now manifesting in this kind of insignificant way, and you're calling out on it, I think that is super important and super great. And that's what most people don't do around them in any system that they live in the matrix, right? In the government system, for example. They ignore every little change in rules or regulations that is happening around them. They let everything just pass by. They don't try and forward look into the future. How is this change or this rule or this emergency act is going to perhaps hurt me in the future if I allow this to now happen or exist as if nothing happened? And we've seen what kind of situations we can get ourselves into if more emergency authorizations, more changes to rules, more like new terms and definitions are being put in place to change existing terms and definitions on how they previously were defined, like pandemic. For example,
and for people's context, and then also people will watch this and then criticize me.
They criticize me all the time, so you're in good company.
But to be clear, it's like what's actually what people would say is a counter argument. They say, and what the actual change is there's a limited amount of arbitrary data.
Yeah.
That can be included in op return output, which is a type of output in Bitcoin, and that they're talking about removing that cap, and that's not a consensus rule, and that they would say, well, people are doing this anyway. They can go directly to miners, and if they do, then it gets in and you validate it anyway. And like either way, it's not consequential. And then they would say something like, we're not doing this because of miner centralization. Of course, they're not doing it because of miner centralization. My point is that they're only able to do it because mining is centralized, right? Because there are three mining pools, because it aligns. It's a change that aligns generally with them,
right?
And that if you went from a constituent of 3 mining pools controlling so much hash rate, if you said that was 100 or 1,000, some people would say, well, there won't be. And like, the point is that it's happening because there's centralization over here, and they can count on these others because the technical soundness of the change to achieve the things that they wanted to achieve are predicated on the miners upgrading quickly. And that the fewer of them that there are that are making those key decisions, the easier it is to know. And so part of it is, so they'd say like, well, it's not motivated by that. And I'm not saying it's motivated by that.
Right.
It's that it's in the back of your head, and that if it were different, you wouldn't be doing this.
Absolutely.
Second thing is they would say, it's like, if it was a consensus change, this would be different. And it's like, it doesn't matter. Like the principle is the principle. What they've clearly signaled is, for the first time, is like, if there is disagreement outside of our contributors, like that is not relevant to us. We have to make the decision that is technically sound. So if you applied that to a contentious soft fork, again, not a hard fork, and it was something that they knew those same 3 mining pools would go along with because it was in their interest. If people understand risk, like, are you familiar with the concept of risk of ruin?
Risk
of ruin.
Of ruin, no.
So the way that I would simplify it is that, like, the way that risk is skewed of possible outcomes, like thinking about the game of, not game, but thinking of Russian roulette.
Right.
Put a bullet in the gun, spin it, pop, there's a 1 in 5 chance, but imagine there's 100.
Yeah.
And it's a 1 in 100 chance that if you're unlucky, you're done. Well, the market doesn't price that risk like it's a 1 in 100 chance, because if you play that game long enough, you eventually die. It's not like you lose 1%. It's that you keep doing that same probability, then it's over. That if you look at this through that same lens of risk of ruin, it's like, hey, even if someone says, well, we wouldn't do that if it was a consensus change, even if the logic does apply, someone that's looking at it and that disagrees about why this change was made and what actually enabled it would say, well, if I'm thinking about the risk of ruin, I can't wait till the risk materializes. And if there really isn't a credible second option right now, that's the source of the risk. So if I want to de-risk this, then it's not what may or may not happen in the future, or what your motivation was or wasn't. We can only operate with the information that's at hand. And it did just set this precedent, and the future is unknown. And the combination of things that enabled it was there not really being this alternative, and the centralization of mining. And so the two things that helped to de-risk that, even if I granted someone that you don't think that you're doing it because of mining centralization, and you think that you would do something differently, it still has to be evaluated on the risk spectrum of what may or may not happen. And if it were to happen, then the risk is critical. Yeah. And so I think that, I just wanted to state that to be fair, of saying like, hey, like, this is how other people disagree. And I'm not even saying that they're not, founded in it. But if you're assessing risk, given the severity of, well, we only have one chance at Bitcoin, that's what creates the immune system to drive decentralization. And so it's not really a bad thing. It's not like they're not bad people.
Yep.
They have a disagreement. I think maybe they, in my own personal opinion, have made bad judgment, but reasonable people can disagree about it. And I just want, in fairness, to say, like, I can see other people's perspective on it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for shedding light on this very current debate. I think it's fascinating. I mean, for me, I think it's the first real debate in the Bitcoin community that I am present to, because I wasn't in Bitcoin when the block size war was happening.
Yeah, and I had just come in, so I wasn't really active. I was paying attention to everything, but I was just kind of, I was the outside observer.
So it's super interesting. Well, just the mere fact that there is a debate, that people are talking about it, that there are different opinions and they're all allowed to be heard. We'll see how things play out, but it's encouraging.
And I would just say, it's like none of it kills Bitcoin. And again, it's that the reason why it's important is because it's not any one decision. It's how decisions are made, and it might not even be the next decision, but you add up enough of it, and it's the great thing about Bitcoin. People that are high agency, that see problems, they can seek out solutions to them, and not everything works out, but you can at least influence outcomes and control your own destiny.
Absolutely. So do you think we've passed the point of no return for Bitcoin's inevitability? Or is there still a real risk of failure or co-option?
I'll answer that two ways. That if everybody assumed Bitcoin's inevitability, it's like, I believe that Bitcoin is inevitable. But I don't operate with the idea that it's inevitable in all scenarios. And that the reason why it's inevitable is because there's this utility that everyone in the world will benefit from, form of money that can't be printed, and there's enough high agency people to be Bitcoin's immune system. And that if you approach it from the perspective of Bitcoin's inevitable and it doesn't matter what happened, that it's inevitable,
yep,
that's only true for the fact that there's high agency people that value it, that not seek to protect it, but seek to create solutions to prevent it from being corrupted, or if there's a risk to solving it. And so I view it through that lens of, I personally view that it's inevitable. The thing that would cause me to really not question it, but the writing on the wall would be as if it's possible to, at the protocol level, and it's interesting, relates to this opportune piece, is like somebody could mine a transaction that has today, and they do it from time to time, that has an opportune limit above 80 bytes, and it gets validated through the network, even if it's not being relayed. The thing that would call Bitcoin into question is if at the protocol level, a single transaction that was otherwise valid could be not accepted by the network as valid.
Yeah.
That would signal is that Bitcoin is not sufficiently decentralized to prevent rules outside of the system from enforcing rules within the system. And so, like, that would be like the smallest chink on the armor, because if you play it forward, it's that, well, if a single transaction could be prevented, say based on who they are or for whatever reason, that would signal that not sufficiently decentralized. And if one could, then it, it's like there's a rule outside the system that's dictating what isn't a Bitcoin. What is that outside force? Is it a government? And if it is, then can they, make it illegal in an enforceable way? Obviously, any government can say that Bitcoin's illegal, but they can't make it go away. Yeah. But if they could enforce a rule that on the network, such that all the network participants get in line and invalidate an otherwise valid Bitcoin transaction, that would be a problem. But that's also why it's so important to constantly decentralize Bitcoin at every layer, and that really isn't a top-down thing. Like it can seem like it in certain instances when you have a big pool or you have a centralization of a core repository, but everyone makes decisions about what versions of Bitcoin they run, and so as risks come up, the inevitability comes from the fact that there's enough self-interested people that all look at risk differently to act as that immune system. So short answer, it is, but not if everybody acts as if it is.
Yeah. And you have faith in good humans in Bitcoin?
No. I don't have faith in good humans. I mean, I have faith in good humans. I don't have faith in all people. And I think that Bitcoin only works because there are people that are at odds with each other, that disagree, and also a lot of bad people in the world that could all use the system that there's still every incentive for people to secure money that can't be printed. So
Yeah.
I don't have like faith. I mean, yeah, I do ultimately have faith in humanity, but I don't like view Bitcoin as secure because good people, it only works in adversarial, in the most adversarial of circumstances.
Super. And where, last question, where do you draw hope from? What gives you hope?
What gives me hope? In certain ways, Bitcoin, that it would be very difficult. The way that I came to Bitcoin was understanding that they were always going to have to print money, and that that would end in hyperinflation of the dollar. Not because I want the dollar to hyperinflate. It's just can't get oil out of the ground and pay people money that you just make up out of thin air. It's not the way that the world works. It's not the way that time works and energy works, and aligned incentives work. It just doesn't. But if you didn't see the solution in hand, it'd be very easy to be pessimistic, and you'd likely be a prepper and living off grid and trying to get as far away from people. But now that there's this thing, Bitcoin, we have a way to trade our way out of the dilemma that's been created via the printing of money and the destruction of money. So Bitcoin's a big source of hope. I have a 7-month-old son at home. Like, that is a huge source of hope. Or like
course.
Being able to focus on the future.
It's beautiful.
Kaylee, my significant other and fiance and soon to be wife, a big source of that. My family, it's like, that's the thing that, it's like Bitcoin is this tool, but it's just a tool. It does not exist there for us to all to look at our computer screens and get mesmerized by our digital wealth. It enables things in our real life that actually matter to allow us to, coordinate with people that you're otherwise have no reason to coordinate with, to be able to live in a peaceful society. And that's not like a hopium, on a Bitcoin standard, life's still difficult,
Still, we have challenges.
Pain and, evil exists in the world, and you gotta deal with it. But at least gives you a fighting chance.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things. But, without Bitcoin, it'd be difficult to be optimistic about a lot of other things. But humans are also very resilient and adaptive. So if Bitcoin didn't exist, something else would. But so my family, faith, Bitcoin, Texans.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Parker, thank you so much for everything you do in this community, in the entrepreneurial ecosystem of Bitcoin, and in education of people, and in having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, have to have you come back through Austin.
I will come
We'll
back.
get you set up to accept Bitcoin payments.
That's right.
We'll go one at a time.
That's right. That's right. I will be back for sure. This is an awesome place.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thanks for being with us. Please take a minute to give this episode a like, a comment, and subscribe or follow. And please share it with your friends so they can also get value and choose to take some positive action in their lives. Till next time.